Good evening, everyone. This is Erin O'Toole, Leader of Canada's Conservatives, and I'd like to welcome you to our telephone town hall in beautiful British Columbia. We're also live on Facebook. Tonight I'm talking about your choice in the election, but off the top I want to say we are, as Canadians, all watching the fires in British Columbia, and our thoughts are with families deeply affected by these tragedies. The election that was launched today is about who Canadians can trust to secure the future of our country. You'll have the chance to ask me any question you'd like about Canada's recovery plan, our plan to get our economy back on track. If you have a question you want to ask me live here tonight, please press *3 now. Or if you're watching on Facebook, you can comment below to ask a question. I want to be clear about this. We should not be having an election in the middle of a pandemic. A leader would be thinking about how to meet the threat of a Delta-driven fourth wave, how to secure our economic recovery, how to tackle the skyrocketing cost of living. It's completely reckless to call an election at this critical moment for no reason. Mr. Trudeau is only focused once again on his own narrow political interests. After years of over-promising and under-delivering for British Columbians, Mr. Trudeau thinks he should be rewarded with a majority. There may be 4 parties on the ballot in British Columbia, but there are only 2 choices: Canada's Conservatives or more of the same. Together with the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens, they have an agenda of more borrowing, more debt, higher taxes, and continually rising prices. But Canada's Conservatives will stand up for hardworking Canadians and their families. That's why we're running on Canada's recovery plan. It's a plan to get Canada's economy firing on all cylinders, including across British Columbia. It's our plan to secure jobs by recovering the 1 million jobs lost and more during the pandemic. It's about accountability by introducing tough new anti-corruption laws. It's about mental health by implementing our Canada Mental Health Action Plan. It's about the country building up our capacity and self-reliance to respond to future pandemics and threats. And it's about the economy and balancing the federal budget over the course of the next decade to not burden our children and grandchildren. Canada's recovery plan includes a detailed plan to protect British Columbia's beautiful environment, a plan that will empower Canadians to make greener choices and reduce emissions while also growing jobs and the economy. Canada's Conservatives will secure the future of communities across British Columbia, including in the Lower Mainland, and we're speaking to many people from there tonight. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. As I said, if you want to ask me a question, Erin O'Toole, Leader of Canada's Conservatives, just hit *3 and you can do that. Or if you're watching on Facebook, you can comment below. And I'm very fortunate to have this moderated by a good friend and a candidate for the Conservative Party after serving with distinction as a new MP, my friend Eric Duncan. Eric.
Thank you very much, Erin. It's great to be here tonight with everybody and day 1 of the election campaign. My name is Eric Duncan. I'm the Member of Parliament for Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry, and I'll be your moderator here tonight. Erin, I'm proud to be part of your team and excited about Canada's recovery plan. Erin was raised in Bowmanville, Ontario, with the middle-class values of hard work and helping your neighbour. Before his career in politics, he served our country in the Royal Canadian Air Force, training in Chilliwack and later in Comox. With Canada's recovery plan, Erin O'Toole will stand up for the people of BC and fight for Canadians everywhere. The telephone town hall is about to start, so please press, as Erin has mentioned, I'll mention here, *3. We want to hear your questions and your feedback for the Leader of Canada's Conservatives here tonight. If you're watching us on Facebook, simply just put a comment below to ask Erin a question. So with that, I believe we have a few coming through here, so let's get right to it. I believe we have Steve from Burnaby that's asking about COVID passports and provincial jurisdiction. So I'll pass it over to Steve from Burnaby. You're on.
Mr. O'Toole, this is Mr. Erin O'Toole.
Hi, Steve. Yeah, you're live with me and my colleague Eric Duncan.
Oh, okay. Mr. O'Toole, I think that you're a great Canadian. I respect the opportunity to ask you a question tonight. Frankly, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. You have a hard job ahead of you to clean up the mess made by others, shall we say, right? anyways, my concern primarily is COVID passports, whether or not they're provincial responsibility, the need for such a tool, the obvious abuse, something like a no-fly list where a young kid in Gander, Newfoundland, I believe, who happens to have the same name as some other guy can't fly, even though he's 3 and they say he's a terrorist or, something like that, right? You know how these things get off the rails, right? So my concern is the creeping nanny state bureaucracy represented by COVID passports, and as far as I can see, the absolute uselessness of such a infringement upon Canadian civil liberties. I hope that's reasonably clear.
Well, thanks, Steve. Thanks for the question. And you've talked about two things there, and I'll break them down. COVID passports, or a vaccine passport, or some sort of passport, is something that the provinces are rolling out in a variety of different ways. They've used proof of vaccination, they've used QR codes, and now some provinces are going to a vaccine passport. There's also vaccine passport being considered for people that want to travel abroad because countries will require proof of vaccination. I always say vaccines are a critical tool. They're the most important tool for us to help us turn the corner in COVID-19. They're safe and effective for use, and I've been very public about how important I think it is for people to be vaccinated, but to also use all the other tools we have, and we've been using for 15 months. Rapid testing and screening. We haven't been doing enough of that in the last year, quite frankly. Mask use, distancing, sanitation, these sorts of things. I think Canadians need to be respected to make their own personal decisions with respect to vaccines or any decision related to their personal health. And I think we should provide people with the information, tell them and allow them to know that vaccines are safe. But I don't think there should be coercion here. We have to work together through the crisis. So if there needs to be some reasonable accommodation to use rapid screening on a daily basis or before a trip, I think we have to try and respect one another as we all fight COVID-19. And in fact, we have to support what the provinces are doing, because when Mr. Trudeau was months late after other countries with a vaccine, it was the provinces that had to make tough decisions about closures, about restrictions. They were dealt the difficult decisions. It was the same with the Delta variant. Mr. Trudeau was late at the border at the beginning of the crisis, and again with variants. And it's the provinces that pay the price. So as a federal leader looking to unite the country, I'll always respect what the provinces choose to do to keep people safe within their provinces, within their jurisdiction. And we have to all work together to respect one another, to fight COVID together, and to use all the tools we have. On the no-fly list kids, that was a group that I worked with personally. In fact, I really appreciated the advocacy of Adam and some of the folks involved that showed how unfair the no-fly list was for a lot of people who just had a similar name and there was no redress mechanism. This is another example. The Liberals promised a solution here. They have yet to deliver. We have a Prime Minister who's very good at photo ops and announcing things, very poor at delivering things. Boil water advisories on reserve, a promise made, not kept. Keeping the budget under control before the pandemic, a promise made, not kept. Respecting people, including people like Jody Wilson-Raybould and many of the other people that left his caucus. Promises made, not kept. Canadians are tired of more of the same, and so, Steve, I'm proud that our caucus worked with the no-fly list kids, and we will deliver on a redress system for fairness for those Canadians impacted.
All right, our next question comes from Ken, and he has some concerns about the amount of money that's been wasted during COVID, and particularly with Liberal corruption. So Ken, we'll pass it over to you to ask your question to Erin O'Toole.
Yes, I have a number of concerns here. I think Mr. Trudeau is using this election as a victory lap, and unfortunately, nobody has ever asked him how much this whole thing has cost, and how much of that cost has been wasted. If you look at a number of the grants that have been given to very, very profitable companies, things like Tourmaline Oil is the one that I use an example, because I happen to hold those shares, and they got a very nice dividend out of it. and also things like various grants and loans to companies that had no need of them whatsoever. I use a couple of landscaping firms that I'm very familiar with. Their business has never been better. They got $30,000 loan, 10,000 of that's free, and they no more needed them to fly in the air. Can you give me an answer as to why you're not holding Trudeau to an account for this? And I'm using this as a strategic question rather than a critique of yourself. Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks, Ken. I think this election is at a bad time for our country. I also think Mr. Trudeau does not deserve a re-election because of some of his ethical conduct, the fact he has no plan for the future, and he's hoping to actually use the pandemic and the ability to have an election in the summer when people aren't really watching. So I'm glad you are, Ken. The biggest problem with the Liberal government's response on COVID was they did not adapt as the pandemic adapted. So as Conservatives, we supported all of the programs to help people, from the CERB to the wage subsidy to rent subsidies, and what we then tried to do was improve them. The rent subsidy was for the big landlords, not the tenants, and we fought hard for that. We got the wage subsidy increase because we wanted to save as many jobs as possible. And then what we said, probably about 10 months ago, Ken, is we had to stop giving millions to corporations making record profits. Stop the approach that was rewarding kind of the fat cats and actually focus the programs on the highly affected. I've spoken to tourism operators across the Lower Mainland, Vancouver Island, because we were a year late really on a national approach to rapid testing. We're losing the Alaska cruise ship traffic through British Columbia over the next few years, when we could have used the tools in the pandemic, including rapid screening and testing, to save some of these thousands of jobs. Indigenous tourism operators on Vancouver Island, I talked about how we should have been helping the highly affected. The hospitality, tourism, those are really hanging on by a thread. So we should have pivoted supports to them and encourage as much as possible for people that have the ability to work to preserve our economic future. And nothing shows, Ken, the money wasted more than the special preference for Friends of the Liberal Party. You know, We Charity gave the Trudeau family $500,000, no registering for lobbying. They suddenly were awarded a contract to deliver funds of almost $1 billion with no questions asked. Friends with connections or even former Liberal MPs got sole source contracts. So even in a crisis, Mr. Trudeau was always putting his friends and the sort of inside Ottawa circle Liberals ahead of Canadians. I think Canadians deserve better than a Prime Minister always in scandal.
All right, we're going to go to Catherine next, who's got a question on CERB and getting employees back to work. Catherine, go ahead. You're on the line with Erin O'Toole.
Oh, hi, Erin. It's Kathy Tate calling from Gibsons, from the Sunshine Coast, and I've been traveling quite a bit this summer on our boat. And a couple of the places that I've been to, like Harriet Bay Resort on Quadra, and the problem there, they say, when you're going for dinner, oh, I'm sorry, we can't get staff. They're all off on CERB. So we have seniors that are in Seashelt that are volunteering their services because the restaurant cannot get staff to work. People go to Whistler to the restaurant. They can't open because they haven't got staff. It's disgraceful, and it's caused by the Liberal government because of CERB, and people don't want to work when they can get free money. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Catherine. I love Gibson's, an iconic part of our West Coast, and I'm glad you're out in the boat. It's been a tough year for us as a country. And as I said with Ken, this has been the biggest failure of the Trudeau government, has been to not adapt to the needs of the crisis. There are some industries that are highly impacted and that will also have the slowest recovery. They also have a huge challenge getting workers. In fact, I spoke to some small businesses in the Coquitlam area, and almost all of them said their families and a small number of loyal employees are burning out because they're trying to make hay when the sun shines, as you say, once hospitality and tourism had some degree of opening, they were trying to take advantage of that and they couldn't get employees. So what we need to do is to have programs that are focused on getting folks back to work. I think there's a nobility in working, whether you're opening your small business in Surrey, whether you're working for a tourism operator. We have to have programs that support those highly affected sectors and encourage people to get back to work. When in the midst of the pandemic, the Liberal government decided just to put all students on the CERB rather than pivot the summer jobs program to allow people more opportunity to work and help small businesses that had some opening between the first and second wave. We were proposing expanding Canada's summer jobs and giving all the students that worked a tuition bonus. There were so many ways we could have adapted these programs to help the highly impacted. So Catherine, Canada's recovery plan, our 1 million jobs pledge, we're going to have targeted support for those highly affected sectors. We're also going to have targeted support to help get people back to work and help some of the chronically long-term unemployed or displaced because of changes in the pandemic. So please tell your friends, Catherine, help is on the way. The Conservatives have a plan, a new leader, and we have a really great set of candidates in the Lower Mainland of BC, and I look forward to getting out there soon.
That's great. And just a reminder to folks on the phone, if you have a question for Erin, you can hit *3 and we'll get you in the queue to answer as many questions as we can. And also, it's interactive here as well. So one of the things we want to mention, if Erin and our Conservative team can count on your support, you can press 1 to let us know you're supporting Erin and our party. Press 2 if it's a no. And if you're still unsure, you can press 3 at this point and give us some feedback. We're trying to make this a little interactive here tonight. Erin, I want to go to Facebook and ask a question that came up here from Tony and says, I know there are small business owners and tourism operators listening in. They've been hit first, hardest by the pandemic, and they're struggling to stay afloat through COVID. As businesses begin to reopen, they fear they won't be able to keep their doors open. What do you say to them in that specific industry?
Well, thanks for the question, Tony, and for following along. As you can see, I've already mentioned a few times that some of the most highly affected sectors have really been let down by the Trudeau government. As I said, at the beginning of the crisis, we were all responding, and we, Conservatives, we were approving and supporting the government on large initiatives. And where they really fell down was not adapting as we went through the pandemic. We saw where the challenges were going to be most acute. And as you said, Tony, small businesses and tourism especially, heavily impacted. They're also going to be the slowest to recover. The she-cession, I met with one group in the tourism sector. 75% of their members are women entrepreneurs, are large employers of women in travel, tourism, recreation, hospitality. So these are highly affected and they need specific targeted help. We didn't need companies, as what Ken said earlier, making record profits collecting the wage subsidy. Much like we didn't need the Trudeau government to pay for the fridges of billion-dollar grocery chains. We have to help the highly affected. We have to help small to medium-sized businesses survive now to thrive in the future. In Canada's recovery plan, we'll surge an economic recovery in all sectors by targeting aid better, getting people back to work, and making sure those businesses, as I said, survive so that they can help us in the long-term plan to get our finances in order. So Tony, please check out Canada's recovery plan. And if you're in the tourism sector, hold on. We appreciate what you're doing. You'll see our policies will kickstart a long-term recovery for your sector.
Next question, we're going to go to James, and this has been an issue I know not just in British Columbia but across the country when it comes to housing affordability. James, go ahead.
Well, Mr. O'Toole, I have specific concerns about 3 things, probably. I have a major concern about, of course, as many Canadians do, about calling an election just 2 years into a mandate. But my chief concern are with regard to the affordability issue for housing in major cities across Canada and the absolute no hope for young people between the ages of 20 and 40 for purchasing a home that I, at the age of 80, have always been able to enjoy for many years. Housing affordability is my chief concern, but my two secondary concerns happen to be the red ink that for years will dominate the chance of a balanced budget and the productivity and investment that is desperately needed because we're right at the bottom of the rules in terms of G20 nations, in terms of productivity and growth. One being very low number and growth being around 0.2% by most economists. I would like those concerns addressed in specific terms if you have a chance. I have not voted for Conservatives since the Mulroney years, but I cannot vote for Mr. Trudeau, given many of the things that already come up in this discussion, and I would really be interested in knowing if you could address those concerns. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, James. At 80, you're still on top of all the issues, the opportunities and challenges facing our country, so thank you. Affordability is something that is critical. We've seen inflation now becoming a problem for the first time in decades. That is fueling the affordability crisis. And in terms of housing, ground zero of that crisis has been the Lower Mainland of BC. It's why I appointed a shadow minister for housing from the Lower Mainland, a millennial who, like you said, he's in that 30-40 range, Brad Viss, that may be, some in his generation may be giving up on home ownership. That's not fair. So there's a number of things all levels of government need to do. We need to see more supply, and we're going to tie some very smart infrastructure and federal partnership funding to that supply, addressing that to provide more opportunity. We're going to have a targeted first-time home buyer package that will actually meet the needs of the market today. The Parliamentary Budget Officer and Auditor General and our critics have shown that the Liberal approach is not meeting the groups they're saying they're helping. And finally, we've for months been talking about why are we permitting foreign non-resident investors to further ratchet up housing values in the Lower Mainland, in the Greater Toronto area where I'm from. A 1% levy is considered a service fee from some of these folks. And in the Lower Mainland, there's also money laundering and other issues. We're going to have a comprehensive policy on this, James. And the red ink you've talked about keeps me up at night. My kids are 15 and 10. We're burdening them with debt and now inflation and the risk of interest rate increases. If that happens, Mr. Trudeau's out-of-control spending and inflation is putting us at a risk of a debt crisis. We're going to see healthcare at risk because of what the Trudeau government's doing. Old age security, other major programs for our country at risk because of runaway spending and the risk of interest rate increases. The Parliamentary Budget Officer said Mr. Trudeau won't balance the budget till 2070 the way he's going. So we're going to address that in a way that's fair. We think we can get to balance in 10 years, keeping taxes low and upfront helping people, helping highly affected sectors, as I said, tackling the mental health crisis, including the opioid crisis, which in BC I've called the pandemic of tears within the COVID pandemic. And then finally, you talked about productivity. James, you clearly follow things very well. So Canada's recovery plan, you know my 5 pillars, I've talked about them. We're going to have some exciting policy that actually address this productivity piece. We feel we can really kickstart our recovery. And in Waterloo this week, I talked about a patent box, allowing companies to have a lower rate of tax for keeping their intellectual property they developed here, keeping it here. Let's see more startups, including great ones like Abceller, Hootsuite, and others in the Lower Mainland. Let's make sure they all stay in Canada. Let's use flow-through shares. We're going to have a number of really exciting policies, James, that are going to address our lagging productivity. Mr. Trudeau led to $160 billion of capital leaving Canada before the pandemic. He accumulated about $100 billion in debt before the pandemic. Our Canada's recovery plan will get the country working again and address the red ink you talked about.
All right, we're going to go to Tom from South Surrey that has a question for you, Erin, on our relationship with China. Tom, go ahead.
Yes, sir. My question is basically this. The Chinese are currently holding 3 people, from what I gather, hostage in some situation where they're not even allowed to speak to anyone from our government or anyone that wants to talk to them. And yet we've got a young lady here that's being treated like a princess, with all kinds of lawyers and guards and God knows what else. When are we going to stand up to the Chinese? Why don't we stick her in a jail equivalent to what these people are in China? And are the Conservatives prepared to go head on with the Chinese on these issues? Because it's becoming very ridiculous.
Well, thanks, Tom. First off, I'm proud that Canada is a leader and a beacon of justice, of transparency, of human rights and fairness. So Madame Meng, the Huawei executive you're talking about, we're going to make sure she has access to the best justice system in the world. We should be proud of the fact that we can actually trust decisions from our courts, and that we have a fair and open and transparent process that really is one of the leaders in the world. I say that as a lawyer myself. So we're not going to repeat what we see the Communist Party in China do to our citizens, and it is very concerning. The 2 Michaels are approaching 1,000 days in captivity as diplomatic hostage. Mr. Schellenberg, who I think you were referring to, essentially had his conviction for a crime put to a death sentence as another form of political pressure on Canada. And I think Canada needs to stand up. We're not going to see that from Mr. Trudeau. He's been offside with the Chinese regime from day one. He said it was the country he most admired when he was running for Prime Minister. Let me assure you, the country I most admire is Canada, the one I've served my entire adult life. And we may be smaller than China when it comes to our economy or population, but we're a giant compared to them when it comes to our commitments to human rights, dignity, the rule of law, rules-based global trade. So we're going to start standing up on those issues, Tom, and working with our allies, because I'll tell you, our closest allies, including the United States, think Justin Trudeau is completely out of step on Huawei, on the sale of companies, Canadian companies, including technology and defense companies, to state-owned enterprises. Mr. Trudeau was approving these things. Mr. Trudeau didn't show up on a vote with respect to human rights and a genocide against a Uyghur population in China. We need to stand up, much like the Mulroney government did leading the Commonwealth on apartheid. I've already said Canada will be a leader on human rights under a Conservative government. And when we're dealing with the communist regime in Beijing, let's always be very clear that that's where our issue is with the political ideology and its suppression of liberties, of rights, its erosion of the rule of law. We have no issues with the rich and ancient history of China and the millions of people that have come to Canada over the generations from China. They should be proud of those history and that culture. It's the political ideology that is our issue. And so we should always make sure that we address that, because we've also seen a very disturbing rise in anti-Asian hate and violence in the pandemic. So let's make sure people know, much like it was with the Soviet Union, our issue is with communism, and a Conservative government led by me, someone who served in the military, worked on international business issues. You will see a principled and serious Canada back on the world stage.
All right, we're going to get back to questions with Erin in just a second, but I've got a question for you, for those that are on our telephone town hall here tonight. We want to know what you're thinking and if we can count on your support with Erin O'Toole and Canada's Conservatives. So if you are supportive, if you are yes for voting Conservative this election, please press 1. If you're not a supporter, please press 2. And if you're unsure at this point, press 3. We want to get your feedback, like we said before, of making this as interactive as possible. We got lots of questions still rolling in here, so we're going to go to Kathy from White Rock that has some questions about when it comes to healthcare. So I'm just going to put you on here. Kathy, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. Thanks for taking my call. My biggest concern at the moment is the healthcare system. I have a nurse that works in emergency that's a good friend, and just the high levels of burnout and the amount of people retiring, it's almost impossible to find a GP. When it comes to like urgent procedures, I mean, I'm actually waiting for something myself that needed to be done in 2 or 3 weeks, and it's over a month, and I've had no phone calls about it. I know this is a provincial responsibility, but what, if anything, could you as a federal leader do to help our healthcare system?
Well, thanks, Kathy. And this is an important question. And I'll tell you, throughout this pandemic, we've owed so much to the folks on the front lines, our nurses, our doctors, our PSWs. It has been a very challenging time. And I know even from speaking with healthcare professionals in my own community, the burnout is real, the fatigue is real, and the mental health strain is real. So as I said, our mental health pillar, the third pillar of our plan, will work to not only partner with the provinces, but also with nonprofit groups on the ground helping with mental health and wellness. I've seen this in action as a veteran, a veterans minister, and a volunteer for military families and others before I became a politician. Can we empower and partner by the federal government helping build capacity with these groups helping? And I think the fatigue with our front lines could be part of that. The biggest thing, as you said, on the provincial side, they run and manage the healthcare systems, and I think the federal government should respect what the provinces decide to do with respect to healthcare, with respect to keeping COVID-19 down. As I said, we have to be a federal government that respects and partners, isn't paternalistic. But I've said to the Council of the Premiers, led by the Quebec Premier, Premier Legault, that we will have a rising transfer of health payments, and we'll talk about that more throughout the campaign. It will be predictable and it will be without conditions. We don't want to see an Ottawa knows best approach. That's leading to division in the country already after 6 years of Mr. Trudeau. The needs of British Columbia are different than the needs of Newfoundland and Labrador, or Northern Ontario versus Southern Ontario. So the federal government needs to be a partner. And then I spoke last week, before the campaign even started, about credential recognition, Kathy, for newcomers, new Canadians, many of whom have foreign credentials in healthcare. We have to speed up and finally tackle this issue that's been with us for decades. It will help our healthcare system by providing more PSWs, more nurses, more nurse practitioners, midwives, physicians, if we can let them hit the ground running. It will help our system. It will help them to be more fulfilled and use the skills they were trained for. So we're going to have a task force on credential recognition that we're going to kickstart movement on this, both federal and provincial, but also working with associations, colleges, professional bodies, because that's yet another option to provide some respite for the front lines that you talked about, Kathy. And I hope to see this improve, because I hate hearing stories like yours where we see some delays in the system, so we all have to work together.
All right, next question is going to be from Darren from Coquitlam, talking about the debt that's been accumulated over the period of COVID. Darren, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you giving me the time to talk. I'm very concerned at the amount of money that I think it's been incredibly necessary to spend just to stop insurrection within our country while COVID has prevented so much economic activity. But I'm very concerned about how this is going to be paid for. What I see, and I'm sure you would recognize as well, that many Liberal supporters and supporters of the Conservative Party that are big corporations have made out like bandits and made huge, huge profits. Wealth inequality has grown immensely as a result of COVID, where the people at the bottom have really had to pay the bills and the people at the top are gaining more wealth. How can you reconcile that with a practice of keeping taxes low? And will you recognize the fact that wealth inequality demands higher taxes of the very rich and the corporations?
Well, thanks, Darren. I've been speaking consistently about how the pandemic has stretched inequalities even further throughout this pandemic. As you heard earlier with Ken's comments, really worried about how over the course of the last 15 months we've seen some companies experiencing record profits still getting taxpayer money. And as I've said, we've got highly affected sectors hanging on by a thread. Small businesses working around the clock, uncertain whether they'll be here in a year. And that's further driving division in our country. Canadians have a progressive tax system. People should pay their fair share, and we're going to make sure that we tackle evasion. We're going to make sure we don't see abuse by folks with connected means or big corporations. I've been talking about this for some time, and I'm serious on it. I really think we need a strong economy that has an economic recovery that can also help us tackle some of these inequalities. And I'm a kid from a suburban family that was taught to work hard, to respect others and my neighbors, and to help. I don't like to see people abusing the system, which is why we've called out some big players that we thought weren't doing their share to help with suppliers and help make sure people got through a tough time. And we've praised some players that have done great work. We did this with respect to grocery and supply chain and grocery code of conduct, for example, Darren. People have been surprised. I've been reaching out and meeting with union leaders and saying Conservatives have to earn the trust of some of the leaders in the union movement, because I want their members to have work, and there's dignity in that work. So I've met with building trades and pipe fitters, iron workers in British Columbia just as part of my outreach. And let me say this about the debt, Darren. We're spending about $420 million a day in excess of what we bring in. We have 1.4 trillion in debt. Mr. Trudeau has literally doubled the debt, and some of it, there was going to be deficits in COVID, no question about it. But he accumulated almost $100 billion in good economic times. So our pledge is to get back to balance over the course of a decade, making sure we address the highly affected, the inequalities, tackle some of the challenges we're facing, like mental health, and to do so in a way that's fair and equitable. I want to see a recovery in all sectors, in all regions, in all income strata, because we need to make sure that we come together after this crisis. And I worry Mr. Trudeau picks what sectors, what regions, building back better, who, according to who. I think having a job, giving some of the chronically unemployed the opportunity to work, provide for their family, have the dignity that goes with that, that will be core to Canada's recovery plan. So stay tuned for more on that, and I appreciate the question.
And just a reminder, we still have some questions coming in, but we want to hear more. So *3 in your phone if you'd like to ask Erin O'Toole, Leader of Canada's Conservatives, a question here tonight. We're going to go to Pradeep from Coquitlam that's got a question about the choice in this election. Pradeep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. O'Toole, and I thank you again for giving me this opportunity to present my views. Well, everybody is mentioning the concerns and how we are going to be addressing it. That's great. My main concern is we do need a change at the federal level, and the main concern I have is how do we make sure that we have Conservatives in the saddle at the federal level and you in the Prime Minister's chair. That's my concern, because we need to get you there in the first place, and we need to work on how do we do that and make it happen so that every concern which has been mentioned is being addressed adequately to everybody's satisfaction. That's my concern, and I'm willing to contribute whatever ideas, experiences I have, so that every segment of the society that represents Canadians in the voting process, their concerns are considered and addressed as well. So my best wishes to you to get elected and run the country the way we would like to be done, and a refreshing change from the past. Not that the past has not been bad. Every person, every party has got pluses and minuses, but we would like to give you a chance, and the concern is how do we make it happen that you become the Prime Minister? Thank you, Mr. O'Toole.
Well, thank you, Pradeep. Thanks for giving me a chance. And the goal of these calls, we've spoken to thousands of people in Quebec, thousands in British Columbia tonight, is to tap your enthusiasm and have more Canadians give me a chance. It's time for change. It's time for an ethical government. It's time for a Prime Minister that's focused on the country and the well-being of the country. And I bring some experience. I'm not a celebrity, but I served 12 years in the military, including some training in BC. I worked in the private sector for 10 years, always tried to give back as part of that. And then I've worked my way up the ranks in federal office by bringing people together, including when I was Veterans Minister. And so right off the top, Pradeep, you can help Katerina Anastasiadis, our candidate in Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam. The Tri-Cities, we've got great folks who are in office now, like Nellie Shin, but we also have great candidates in the Tri-Cities and in the Lower Mainland, and so you can help them out. Door knocking, following all health protocols, calling, volunteering. We have a plan, and you can also tell folks in Coquitlam, Canada's recovery plan, I think, is the roadmap to uniting this country, to getting us back to work after the pandemic, and to make sure Canada leads again. I think our country's best days are ahead of us, but we need a plan. We need to get people working, and we need leadership. Ethical leadership focused, the well-being of families, of small businesses, of our seniors, and that's what the Conservative Party of Canada is offering, and we just need to harness a bit of your enthusiasm and multiply that. So thank you, Pradeep, for the good wishes.
We're going to take another question here from Facebook. A good one comes in. Healthcare, a popular topic among many here tonight. Will Conservatives invest in healthcare after the pandemic? We can't afford cuts. Maybe some of your thoughts, Erin, on that subject of federal transfers.
Absolutely. We will invest, and we will be a partner, not a top-down, Ottawa knows best dictating like Mr. Trudeau likes to do. I've said with premiers when I've been meeting with them, I had a great call with Premier Horgan and talked about priorities. We talked about some things we shared in common, and a lot of respect for the leadership all premiers have shown during this crisis of all political stripes. And I've said we will have increasing transfers for healthcare every year in a way that's predictable so that our provincial partners can plan, and to make sure that we're not restricting them, saying this is only for that. The one area where I'm going to want to really partner with them is mental health. It's in our platform pillar, but we will never dictate or tie or bind the provinces. We will have increasing, and I know the provinces want to tackle issues like the opioid crisis in British Columbia. I want to be a partner there. Part of our mental health pillar also will be working with employers. We're going to have an approach to incentivize more coverage for mental wellness. We find it's not only the thing we need to do after the pandemic, it is good for productivity. I saw that as Veterans Minister. Get people the help they need. Get them on the road to wellness. They'll be your best employee. It's something that good companies are already doing. How can we incentivize to make sure more do that? And I really want to say the leadership of our team, particularly Todd Doherty and Prince George, my personal senior advisor on mental health, our initiative for a 988 suicide prevention hotline, we tried to work all party. It passed the House of Commons in a unanimous vote just before Christmas. But again, no action. There's never any follow through by the Trudeau government. If I'm known for anything, it's about building a team, putting a plan together, and delivering. And we need to deliver on the wellness piece. So healthcare, coming out of the pandemic, we need to make sure that we're prepared, and our plan both from mental health and the preparedness pillar, Pillar 4, will make sure we have domestic vaccine capacity, we have more self-reliance as a country.
Next question is going to come from Jerry here that's asking about, again, our relationship with China, and specifically perhaps on the Winter Olympics. Jerry, go ahead.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much for listening to me, and also thank you for sponsoring this kind of contact with us as voters. Anyway, my concern is we have a lot of platitudes about how we're going to deal with China, but from what I can see of it, we don't really do very much about it. For example, we have these Winter Olympics coming up. In the meantime, we have these two Michaels illegitimately imprisoned. We've had Michael Spavor just imprisoned for 11 years unjustly. We have these Confucius Institutes in our universities, which are nothing but a propaganda arm of the CCP. I read in the paper that the Western democracies, 25 of them, are standing shoulder to shoulder regarding the imprisonment and sentencing of Michael Spavor. I also saw on Fox News yesterday the CEO of Nike saying that China and Nike are great partners. They don't plan to confront them on any major issues. I also saw today, I'm leading a lot of things here, where China has claimed to have won the Olympics. the most medals by claiming that Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau are part of China. We also haven't done anything about Huawei with the other Five Eyes countries. Also, China's interest, the way I see it and reading, is militarily and economically. If they can control us through military and with a strong economy by investing in countries around the world and controlling the natural resources, they got us. And in talking to my friends,
there's a lot there, Jerry. Can I get to some of it, because there is a lot. I appreciate that.
Go ahead.
Well, listen, I agree with you. We hear a lot of hollow words from the Prime Minister often, and nothing showed hollow action more than the fact that when the Conservative opposition brought a motion to the House of Commons declaring the internment and the treatment of the Uyghur minority population in China a genocide, Mr. Trudeau didn't even show up for the vote. That is a first. Canadian Prime Ministers of all stripes historically were always showing up for human rights, for our values as a country. We're the country of Vimy Ridge, of Kandahar, of fighting apartheid. And I think that will be a focus for us. So the Conservatives, we've shown more than just platitudes, Jerry. In fact, the Canada-China Special Committee of Parliament was created by our party, created by me in my previous job before I became leader, so we could start shining a light on how out of touch and out of step with our allies Mr. Trudeau has been with respect to the Communist Party in China. On Huawei, as you said, we're the only Five Eyes ally that has not made the decision to prevent Huawei, a state-owned enterprise, to be part of our 5G infrastructure. The 5G is what the Internet of Things, our digital economy will be built upon. So they should not be part of 5G. We should not be part of the Asian Infrastructure Bank, working on projects of infrastructure elsewhere in the world while ours is crumbling. And the Belt and Road Initiative from the Communist Party is often tying projects to foreign policy objectives, often with poorer countries. So, as I've said, if there's one area that Mr. Trudeau has been completely out of step with our closest allies, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand especially, it's with respect to China. We've also been calling for a relocation of the Beijing Olympics. There should not be an Olympics taking place when a genocide is happening within the country. The Olympics is about bringing countries together. We were so proud of our incredible teams, the women's soccer team, our swimmers, Andre DeGrasse, you know, how well we did in decathlon. It was incredible. I loved watching it with my kids. Tokyo was inspiring, despite the challenges of COVID. That's about the world coming together, and I don't think it should happen when there's a genocide happening. So I've said a few times in the last few weeks, the world is watching China with the treatment of our citizens, with the treatment of their own citizens, the police state in Hong Kong. So Jerry, we will make sure that we stand up for our interests at home and abroad. We stand up alongside our allies. We keep Canadians safe. And we see a lot more made in Canada and a lot less made in China.
All right, our next question is going to be coming from Gordon that wants to talk about more low-cost housing units in Vancouver and how the Conservative plan would do that. Gordon, go ahead.
Yeah, my girlfriend has a grandson that lives with her. He's only 20 years old, but how do you find he's mentally incapacitated? He couldn't live in a place of his own if he wanted to. Where's the low-cost housing for the people on the streets and for people that make under $20,000 a year? They can't afford $1,300 a month for a one-bedroom apartment when they're on $300 a month welfare.
You're absolutely right, Gordon. And the housing crisis is a deep one across the country, especially in British Columbia. And when I asked my shadow minister, a young MP from British Columbia, Brad Viss, to be our shadow minister, I asked him to address three different parts of the housing crisis. There is homelessness and the vulnerable that require specific support, including some partnership from the federal government alongside the provinces and municipalities and even nonprofit groups. Then there's the rental housing issue. Folks that are working but don't have the ability to afford escalating rents in areas like the Lower Mainland, for example. It's becoming creating more working poor because skyrocketing housing crisis added to the inflation crisis. We're seeing the cost of groceries and other things. And as I said, we want to be the party that stands up for the dignity of work. So that's a second area, that rental piece, and the federal government has a role there. And then the third is that accessibility for the first-time home buyer, the folks, and we've talked to many in BC, it's holding back some of Vancouver's great attraction of talent around the world, as some folks say, I can't afford to live in the greater Vancouver region. And we have to make sure that the first-time buyers programs and Ottawa's role in them are accessible, meeting the needs of today. So those are three distinct parts of the housing crisis, Gordon, and you've hit the nail on the head for the situation with the 20-year-old person with difficulties. So we need to be a federal partner. We need to work with the other levels of government, and this is going to be a priority. We've been talking about it over the last few months, often the only party proposing real ideas in Ottawa to deal with this. You're going to see a lot in Canada's recovery plan, and this is an area where I think we haven't talked enough, we haven't done enough in the past as a party. And I've said many times, I'll be saying it a lot over the next month, Conservative Party of 2021 is putting forward a team and a plan to tackle the issues facing Canada 2021. We're also reaching out. We want more people, even people that may not have ever voted for us, to take a look. We've got a new leader, Canada's recovery plan that we'll deliver on, and we're going to tackle issues, including housing, in a way that I think really makes progress. So, Gordon, stay tuned.
And just a final reminder to everybody that is joining us on the teleconference, we want to hear from you. We want to make it interactive and ask you a question. If Erin O'Toole and Canada's Conservatives, we can count on your support, please press 1 and let us know. If the answer is no, press 2. And if you're unsure still, please press 3. That feedback is very helpful for us and our team. I'm getting a note we got time for one more question. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to go to Chuck from Kelowna, who's talking about COVID variants coming into the country. Chuck, go ahead. You're on the line with Erin.
Hello, Erin. I'd like to ask you, why wasn't Trudeau gone after more when he didn't stop the people from coming into country last year, January 14th? And where are these variances still coming from? You know, they say they're in our country, but where did they come from? They just didn't come here, poof, they're here. So somebody's still letting people into their country. And if it's true, the Prime Minister is still letting these people come in, shouldn't he be in jail because he's killed all these people? Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck. I always hold everyone to account, including the Prime Minister, and I don't think that's an option. We can use our democracy to replace a government that I really do think need replacing. And the variant issue is an example. You asked where some of the variants came from. There were variants of concern from India, South Africa, Brazil, and the UK. And these are things that we have to track very carefully and then control the border, and also use rapid testing and screening. And this is something that you would have thought the Prime Minister would have learned from the first wave by the third wave. But sadly, he didn't. This is a Prime Minister who is very good at press conferences on doorsteps, very poor on actually delivering on what's talked about. He said the three things that we needed to do in the first wave was to control the spread of the virus and the entry, contact trace, and rapid test. He hasn't delivered on any of those. The app that was developed, he never talks about now. The federal government played no role in contact tracing, no role at the border, at the beginning or at the variant stage. It took our demands as an opposition, it took demands of many of the premiers to finally take a more serious approach to controlling travel when there was public spread and uncontrolled spread of variants in other countries. And then on the rapid screening and testing, They approved rapid tests months after other countries, and these are not cancer drugs. They're tests. In many cases, they're over-the-counter type tests that can be administered by someone themselves. Other countries have delivered millions of them and have used them to give more flexibility with respect to the economy. We need rapid testing and screening on a national basis at every port of entry, every airport, and if we use it, we can actually get ahead of the risks of some of the variants of concern and contain spread through tracing. So we need to lead again. So Chuck, our Canada's Recovery Plan, the fourth pillar, is about securing the country, securing our self-reliance, our capacity to deliver rapid tests, domestic-made vaccines, and medical equipment. We can never make the mistakes of the first crisis again. At the first wave, we were all a bit surprised. But the Trudeau government never learned or adapted over the course of the crisis. And that's what I was trained to do in the military and in the private sector. And I think it's the difference between our Prime Minister right now, who is very good at announcements. I'll be very good at the follow-up and the delivery.
Thanks, Erin. It's amazing how quick an hour goes by here tonight. And as I hope you've seen, our Conservative team is ready to deliver Canada's Recovery Plan and stand up for hardworking Canadians and their families. If you do not have a chance to ask your question, please stay on the line and leave a message for our staff, or leave your question in the comments on Facebook below. Your question is important, and we'd like the chance to respond to you.
Well, thank you, Eric. You're a good friend. You're on my leadership team. You're also nearby, so thank you for coming over to the studio here in Ottawa to allow us to talk to folks in BC. Thanks to everyone that participated. It's great to see you through the telephone town hall, through Facebook Live, and to hear what's on your mind, what's concerning you on day one of this election, and to hear more about our plan. Too many Canadians, I believe, have been left behind and are expecting a plan, and they're not going to get one from the Liberals, the NDP, or the Greens. It's time to get BC's economy back on track, all sectors of the economy, all parts of British Columbia, the island, the lower mainland, the interior. We need to work together to secure the future for our kids and our grandkids. So let's keep this conversation going. As Eric said, you can hit 1, 2, or 3 as part of the feedback on this. You can check out our website or Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And if you have any other issues, please contact us. We're here to earn your trust. We're here to tell you more about Canada's Recovery Plan. We're here to secure the future for British Columbia and for all Canadians. So be well, and thanks for being part of this great forum tonight.